Hello, everybody, and welcome to Home Talk USA on the King Broadcasting Network. This is the Made in America Hour. I'm Greg Owens, and I'm here with two exciting guests, Jim Stuber and John Toomey of CPA, or the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Before we get on to our conversation, I want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors. This segment is sponsored by Bond Products. For DIY carpet bonding, there is only one Instabind. You can find it at bondproducts.com. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Greg.
Jim, we've had you on, and I'll let you reintroduce yourself in a second. But John, this is your first time on the show. So why don't we start off by you telling us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, where you went to school, what's your degree, and then segue into maybe a little bit of your experience with CPA and what role you're playing in a very important organization.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Greg. Well, thanks for having me on. Really excited to be here. You know, I grew up outside Philadelphia, in between Bethlehem and Philadelphia in the suburbs there. Went to college in Philadelphia, went to law school in Florida. But, you know, growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, I certainly was exposed to the flight of manufacturing and got to see a lot of kind of the old steel mill in Bethlehem Steel, and got to, had a lot of family that worked in manufacturing as well. So it was always near and dear to my heart. And when I went off to law school, I never would have intended that somehow I'd end up here advocating for domestic manufacturers. But, law school led me to Capitol Hill, where I was counsel for a member on the Ways and Means Committee, which is the Tax and Trade Committee in Congress. It's the oldest standing committee in Washington. And worked for a congresswoman named Diane Black, who is no longer a member. She retired and ran for governor in Tennessee. And worked for her for a number of years, and then went off and advocated on behalf of a mid-sized manufacturer in Tennessee who was facing a host of tax and trade issues, and eventually found CPA through some mutual work, and been with the group now 5 years, helping to lead their government affairs efforts in Washington, and fighting on the front lines every day for our members, and trying to make us a more prosperous country. And so that's a real short and quick overview of where I started and where I'm at now.
When people hear the words lobbying group, they often think of a corporation out there that's trying to weasel their way in and get some benefits for themselves. CPA is a different type of lobbying group, isn't it? It's a cause-based lobbying group. And
that's American, right, Greg.
Yeah, American manufacturers used to depend on organizations like the American Chamber of Commerce and organizations like that, but they've sort of, in my estimation, lost their moral compass, and they've drifted off. They represent the multinationals, and CPA, I'm going to do a big shout out, Coalition for a Prosperous America, really fights in the trenches in Washington, D.C. for the interests of manufacturers like our company, that are still making things in the United States and need a voice and a vote in Washington, right?
Well, that's well said, Greg. You said it perfectly. There used to be a time when the Chamber of Commerce and others were, on the front lines battling for American producers. And sadly, that doesn't reflect today. Today, most of those groups are led by large multinational interests who really, they just don't have the best interests at heart for companies like yourselves and others who are making products here in the U.S. And CPA is really at the forefront in that battle. We're leading on all things trade as it relates to, pretty much every industry. Today, we represent members from textiles to pharmaceuticals to flatware, right, as you know, and putting their interests forth and in front of Congress and in front of the administration. And it wasn't too long ago when tariffs were kind of a four-letter word, but today, they're pretty popular, and we're excited about the future and where this discussion goes.
Well, Jim, our audience that's returning is probably a little bit familiar with you. We've talked a little bit about your book. You actually wrote a book on it, right? What If Things Were Made in America Again? Welcome back to the show, and why don't you briefly introduce yourself before we move on to the next segment?
Sure, glad to, Greg. One thing John and I have in common is our brushing up against the steel industry and American manufacturing. My family all actually worked in the steel mills in Pittsburgh and Ohio, and that's what I grew up with. And so, and I started out then on Capitol Hill as John did after law school, well, actually during law school when I was at Georgetown. And so public policy was my first love. And so some years later, I reconnected with public policy when I really had my light bulb moment and started wondering why we were sending all these jobs overseas. And as I looked into answering that question, I ended up 3 years later with the book, What If Things Were Made in America Again, where I tried to answer the questions why we were sending all those jobs overseas, how much harm it was causing, and what could we do about it? And the what we could do about it part led me, of course, to CPA, because as you guys have just said, once the National Association of Manufacturers went globalist, really CPA has been the only game in town for anybody who was really representing American producers. So I was happy to start volunteering with CPA and with you, Greg, as we chaired the Buy American Committee. And then happily, they brought John on to head up their government relations activities. And I've been partnering with John, supporting him in all that work with my legislative council work. So it's exciting, as we will be discussing, how far things have come since CPA was founded. And we're pretty excited about what the future holds.
Yeah, two things that I want to give a shout out to CPA on. Number one, I'm a person who's interested in policy, not necessarily politics. You want politics, just turn on the news. If you want to really do something on the policy end of it, CPA is it's a bipartisan organization, which is point number two. Or I should actually say nonpartisan organization. Democrats, Republicans, independents, people from all walks of life coming together to really support American manufacturing and bringing our jobs home, as you said. And from my personal perspective, Sherrill Manufacturing and the flatware industry, they've helped us do things like get our product written back into the Berry Amendment so that we can have more sales to the government. Helped us set up meetings on Capitol Hill, substantive meetings where we can meet with people who can actually listen to our ideas and influence policy. So for me, it's been a wonderful experience working with you on the Buy America Committee, bringing these issues to light. We're going to talk a little bit about tariffs, cool and de minimis coming up. It's just been not only a lot of fun, but it's been very productive and very genuine. And really, go ahead.
I would just add to that, Greg, that the hallmark of CPA is, as you said, it's nonpartisan and also very research-based and information-based. Mm-hmm. So whatever our initiative is, for example, bringing generic drugs back to the United States, John and another of the member of CPA staff did a very in-depth study of that and uncovered what the real problem was with these Indian subsidies, to their companies. So we always start from there. And then we're very well received on Capitol Hill and the administration because of the fact that we're all very fact-based. And then we also provide very detailed solutions that people are happy to receive.
Yeah, I mean, I had Rosemary Gibson on the show a couple weeks ago, and she went through what I consider to be one of the scariest made in America stories possible. What is in our drugs, what's supposed to be in there that may not be, and what is that shouldn't be. And all the issues surrounding us losing control over the manufacturing process as we send all of that, or the vast majority of it, overseas. And if you out there in the audience have a chance to go back in the archive and listen to that episode, I think you'll be shocked, but also, working with CPA, Rosemary on Capitol Hill, we're getting the word out and letting members of Congress know that this is an issue that needs to be focused on, and using facts, not rhetoric, to really try and push forward some legislation that's going to move the needle and eventually get something done. But we're going to have to take a quick break here coming up, pay a couple bills, and when we come back, I'll be back with John and Jim, and we're going to move on to the results of the election and what we can expect in the days coming up. This is Greg Owens on Home Talk USA. This is the Made in America Hour. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Home Talk USA on the King Broadcasting Network. This is the Made in America Hour, and I'm here with Jim Stuber and John Toomey of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. We're going to get back to our talk, but before we do that, I want to give a big shout out to one of our sponsors. The sponsor of this segment is Green Products. Protect your wood from future damage with Cooper Green Wood Preservative. You can find it at greenproductsco.net. Jim, John, welcome back. Thank you for introducing yourselves in segment one, talking a little bit about the Coalition for a Prosperous America and our work. I'd like to move on to a new subject, which is sort of a recap of the election and what we can expect in terms of general policy shifts, our posture towards China, not necessarily as we discuss the rhetoric, but what substantive things can we expect in terms of policy shifts? Maybe highlight a couple of the cabinet positions, folks that we know are going to be favorable to our subject, folks that maybe we still don't know, and get the sort of the CPA perspective on all this. So, welcome back, and maybe John, we can start off with you. What big changes do you expect between the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I think one of the biggest changes that we'll see, in the first 100 days, really kind of looking at the immediate impact of the presidency of President Trump, is going to be their swift action to implement a broader tariff policy. And what I mean by that is, what we've heard from the president-elect, what we've heard from him on the campaign trail, is a willingness to move forward with increasing tariffs, across the board, and really not holding back this time when it comes to trade policy. And I think, there was at times some great work done by President Biden in increasing tariffs in some specific sectors, like we saw with syringes and solar, but too often there was trepidation and infighting from within with the Biden admin when it came to tariffs. There was a lot of, he had folks on either sides of the argument, right? And so take solar, for example. There was a period of time in the Biden administration where President Biden put a moratorium on solar products coming from Southeast Asia, right? So he waived the tariffs on these products coming into the country. That had a big impact on our domestic manufacturers of solar. You won't find that in a Trump presidency. There's going to be no waiving of tariffs. There's going to be no capitulation. So I think that's going to be the biggest shock, right? The biggest difference in a good way. And so I would expect to see, immediate action on tariffs and trade policy once he assumes the office.
Well, he actually started an initiative, I believe it was during the Biden administration, the Buy America office, which was supposed to, I guess, in some sort of a way, promote American manufacturing and help bring back some of that for government procurement. And it almost seems that it went in the opposite direction. It sort of ended up being an office that granted waivers, like the waivers that you're talking about. Do you expect that office to continue under OMB, or do you think that it will not continue? What's your expectation there, if any?
If it continues, I can tell you it will not be a waiver program. It will not be a waiver office. So there may be an office titled, Made in America, Buy America, but it will not be a waiver office. I can tell you that much from what we hear and know and reading the press. So, yeah, I wouldn't expect the waivers to continue in that fashion.
All right, so Jim, you're up. I mean, you obviously went through the first Trump administration. We saw what John described as some of the back and forth in there. That transitioned into Biden. There were a couple of good things that were introduced there, but again, like John said, a lot of back and forth. What in a broad sense are you expecting to see in terms of policy shifts in general?
Well, I would, as far as the administration goes, I would echo what John said. We've been studying and even trying to have some influence on some of the appointments And even in the first Trump administration, you'll remember there was this internal conflict. Under Biden, it was more the environmentalists versus the America First, whereas with Trump, it was more the globalists versus America First. You always had people like Steve Mnuchin trying to fight what Trump wanted to do. From what we can tell, Trump's appointees this time, uh, some of them are kind of a question mark, but nobody's really jumping out as a pure globalist who's going to be fighting the America First agenda. So we're encouraged by that. We're very encouraged by Marco Rubio's appointment as Secretary of State. Senator Rubio has been very much in our camp all along. But I think that on the legislative side in Congress, again, we're seeing very good signs. As John has said, 5 years ago, you weren't having the conversations we're having now. But there is still a lot of globalist sentiment, a lot of WTO sentiment in the Congress. And so that's going to have to be overcome. But I think that we would say that, especially with President Trump being in office and being able to pick up that phone and talk to people on the Hill, we think that it's going to be a much better environment, during this coming presidential term.
Yeah, you bring up Steve Mnuchin, who was the Treasury Secretary and obviously the advocate for globalism and Wall Street within the first Trump administration. I don't think that's going to happen again. I certainly hope not. I'm hoping, and I brought this up during a CPA conference. I said, how do we get the guys on Wall Street to start listening to us and be in our favor? And I sort of got a couple chuckles. They're never going to be there, Greg. Don't even consider that. I think that tide has shifted. I'm hopeful that some of the folks on Wall Street will start taking their money and bringing it back to the United States and investing in American-made products and really helping support our cause. And I think a Treasury Secretary, Commerce, all of these appointees of Trump can sit down with these guys and negotiate them in the right direction. That would be a big step forward, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, and I think that even Wall Street, they're seeing more of the risk that China represents just from a financial point of view. So I think that that's another dimension of this that may be undercutting some of that old Wall Street resistance.
Right. Well, we are going to have to take a quick break here. And when we come back, or John, did you?
No, I was just going to add something we can mention after the break if you'd like. But.
Yeah, we're going to have to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll pick that subject right back up. This is the Made in America Hour on Home Talk USA on the King Broadcasting Network. We will be right back. Welcome back, everybody, to Home Talk USA on the King Broadcasting Network. This is the Made in America Hour. I'm Greg Owens, here with John and Jim from the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Before we get back to our conversation, I want to give a big shout out to Aztec Washer, the sponsor of this segment of the program. They manufacture revolutionary and innovative roofing products. They've been in business since 1968. Their motto is seal it right, seal it tight. You can find them at aztecwasher.com. Welcome back, John and Jim. As we went to break, John, you wanted to do some follow-up comment on some of the appointments and the relationship with Wall Street and getting them on board with reshoring some of our manufacturing jobs.
Yeah, I'll just make one more point on that. And I think, compared to the first term of President Trump, this term, you're going to see a cabinet who's very aligned with the president's goals, right? Especially when it comes to trade, whether that's through Mr. Lutnick, Mr. Percent, Mr. Kennedy. You're going to see broad and strong support from within his cabinet, where in the past, you mentioned Mr. Mnuchin, there were issues, right, within the cabinet. There was also issues with the vice presidency, right? And so now you have a very strong and supportive vice president in Mr. Vance, and I think that will carry a lot of weight and support as the president makes his pitch to Capitol Hill, who's still not entirely sold, right, on the president's trade agenda overall, talking about Republicans. They have some great leaders up there, like Mr. Jason Smith, the leader of the Ways and Means Committee, who really is a true transformative change in Republicans leading that tax and trade committee. He's very aligned with the president. He's a good, supporter of the president. He'll get a lot done. But by and large, Republicans on Capitol Hill still need some work, and I think you'll see the support from his cabinet, from his vice president, really help influence the way Congress goes, especially as they look to pass legislation through the reconciliation vehicle, which is a simple majority in the Senate, where they'll be able to get a lot of their policy done. And then also with Wall Street, you guys mentioned a shift in Wall Street. I think you are seeing that. I think the analysts are smart. They're noticing the change in geopolitics across the globe. But also look at Silicon Valley. Look at guys like Mark Andreessen, right? Maybe one of the most influential VC guys in Silicon Valley, co-founder of Netscape. Just most recently, he tweeted out something to his millions of followers about how, the remarkable chart of tariffs as a percent of federal revenue, right? And the next second industrial revolution is before us here with this administration, the golden age, as President Trump has called it. So I think you have guys like Mark Andreessen supporting tariffs. I think that's a pretty big signal, and I think the Wall Street guys are calculating that in their forecast here for what we can expect in the new year.
Yeah, well, I had Don Buckner on, and I actually had a brief conversation with him a little earlier this morning about the revenue aspect of this. And, the tariffs, we have lost so many millions and billions of dollars in revenue to the Treasury because of the outsourcing of manufacturing. Those dollars are going overseas. They don't pay school taxes. They don't pay property taxes. They don't pay income taxes. And tariffs are one way of getting those back. And, there's the revenue aspect of it, but there's also the leveling of the playing field aspect of it, where I've heard everything from 10% to 60% during the speeches. It'll be interesting to see where that comes out and how it all plays out going into it. With as much debt as we have in our nation right now and the size of our deficits, tariffs are one way of really narrowing those gaps and getting us back on track fiscally. But there's kind of two things in my mind that I'm looking for. And to close out this segment, I'd like to talk about first day initiatives. And I think the Trump administration, when they won the first time, Joe Rogan interviewed him, and he all but admitted that they were ill prepared for what they were going to face. I mean, it was a different political climate, and they didn't have any experience doing this. Well, this is now the second trip to the rodeo. They seem very prepared, don't they? Do you have any inkling of what we might see in terms of day one initiatives?
Look, I think, it's a great question, Greg. And I can just say this. This is a team that has been put together by the president-elect that is polished and prepared. I believe they have been working on these day one initiatives for months now. There is a real order to how they're going to get things done. You see that also with the leadership, with Susie Wiles, leading his chief of staff, someone who has assembled a team, not a group of folks who are in it for themselves. And so I would expect, that day one, the rubber hits the road. You're going to see some real action here. You're going to see action on trade. I don't want to give away too much. I think it's good for this to happen as it does organically once they make their moves. I think you're going to see actions on trade. I think you're going to see immediate actions on things like essential medicines. What the president was vocal on towards the end of his last presidency. But there's certainly not a shortage of preparedness between the different teams in his cabinet, making sure they have their priorities ready to go. And I think that starts at the top with the president-elect and also with his great choice in staff, and folks like Susie Wiles, making sure that this team's ready to go. So Yeah, you're going to see some immediate actions on trade. That's for sure. And then you're also going to see them get their folks confirmed. They'll get them through the Senate, which will be, key. I think, you look at key posts like Ambassador Lighthizer in the last term. I think he got in around like March, April, once he was confirmed. So that's the other goal, right? Let's get these guys in. Let's get them confirmed. Get the cabinet secretaries in place. But yeah, I can tell you that they're ready to go this time. It's a different team with some of the players below the president. So
right, and then there's also a transition in the Democratic Party. They've been focused on issues that sort of drifted away from their core values, particularly the blue dog Democrats, as they call them. We did lose one champion on the Democratic side, Sherrod Brown. What sort of cooperation in a very thin margin in the House can we expect? And who are the key Democrats in the House and the Senate that could really help the president push a new trade policy and actually bring these jobs back to the United States?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, look, the reality is the Republicans have the trifecta, and they're going to run trade policy through reconciliation, right? That's a budgetary tool that allows them to pass policy with a simple majority in the Senate. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you saw tariff legislation, right, revenue generating tariffs in a bill from Congress in the reconciliation package. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw that. The Democrats will play a role as far as certainly those who are in vulnerable seats. Look at Jared Golden, who won by narrow margin in Maine, who speaks a lot like the president, right? He's someone who I think the Democrats should look to. Ro Khanna from California has been someone who has been banging the drum about the Democrats losing their way really on trade. The Democrats lost a lot of big supporters in this argument from Ways and Means. Look at guys like Dan Kildee, the passing of Bill Pascrell out of New Jersey, who was a wonderful champion for issues like this. They're going to need to find a way to replace their bench. Their bench is very short right now on the Ways and Means Committee, because that's where you got to look, right? You got to see, hey, where are our guys? Where are they on the main committees that matter? Ways and Means in the House, Senate Finance in the Senate, okay? And right now, the Democrats in the House, they really need a wake-up call. They got to start putting some of those guys like Jared Golden, Ro Khanna, get them on Ways and Means, start talking about these issues. Because I'll tell you what, and Ro has recognized this. He's mentioned this recently on a podcast. President Trump's eating into their lane substantially, and they need to wake up and find a way to to play ball here. So we'll see how that goes.
All right, Jim, we got to go to break here quickly. Any comments?
No, I think John summed that up pretty well.
Yeah, I'm just really looking forward to seeing. Maybe it's a dream, maybe I'm a little naive, but I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more cooperation on these substantive issues that really transcend partisan lines and good policy, as opposed to just pure politics. Anyway, we're going to transition into the next segment and talk a little bit deeper into into the second Trump administration. Talk about what we can see, maybe this reconciliation bill, what could or could not be included in that first 100-day period. This is the Made in America Hour on the Home Talk USA on the King Broadcasting Network. I'm here with John Toomey and Jim Stuber from the Coalition for a Prosperous America. We have to take a quick break, but we will be back in a few moments to wrap it up and talk a little bit more about what we can expect over the course of the next 4 years. Welcome back, everybody, to Home Talk USA on the King Broadcasting Network. I'm Greg Owens, and this is the Made in America Hour. I'm here with John Toomey and Jim Stuber from the Coalition for a Prosperous America. And in this final segment, we're going to talk a little bit about what we can expect to see in the next 4 years. But before we get to that, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor for this segment, Lion Energy. You can go anywhere with portable power solar generators. Excuse me. You can find them at lionenergy.com. John, Jim, welcome back. And Jim, let's start out with you this time. We talked a little bit about the day one initiatives and the reconciliation bill and how the trifecta and how that can all be put in place rather quickly. But then there's going to be a lot of things that transpire over the course of what is commonly referred to as that first 100-day agenda, and then things that might take longer and play out over a longer 4-year period. What are you really looking for in terms of some legislation? And we've talked about pool or country of origin legislation and de minimis. I don't know if those are going to be day one issues, or you think those are going to take a little bit more time to push across the finish line.
Well, I'd say those would probably take a little more time, Greg. They are part of the general trade agenda we were speaking of earlier. So let me just park those for a moment and say that at CPA, we really are focusing on several big areas that we do think we could really see some success in the solar realm, protecting our domestic industries from what are called foreign entities of concern. These are companies that are based in China primarily, but also Iran, Russia, and North Korea, and making sure that they don't come in here and take over our market while using the credits that were passed in the Inflation Reduction Act for renewable energy. It's just a crazy thing to think we might do that, but so we would foresee legislative action on that front. We've already mentioned the work that John had done previously on our generic drugs. 90% of our drugs are generics, and so enacting some incentives to bring that manufacturing home from India and China. And then on the steel front, we have this recent focus on Nippon Steel trying to take over U.S. Steel. We don't want that to happen, but we do want to have a healthy steel industry. And so we have a package of legislation that we'll be pushing on Capitol Hill to not only keep that industry domestic, but to build it up again, as important as it is. And finally, I would add, we mentioned China. We are active in, not only do we want to not give our federal benefits away to China and the CCP and the PLA, but we also want to stop giving them our capital that they're using to build up their economy and their aircraft carriers. So we could foresee that seeing some action in the Congress, although that would likely be outside the reconciliation process. But as John mentioned earlier, this is the way you can get legislation through the Senate without needing the 60 votes to get over a filibuster. And so CPA will be pushing in those three big areas I mentioned to get that into an omnibus bill that would be under the reconciliation process. And we're hoping that some of these trade priorities, like closing the de minimis loophole, can be included in there.
Well, one of the things you bring up, the steel industry. Okay, I started out my career in steel distribution, so I know a little bit about it. Visited a lot of steel mills in my life. And guess what? The one thing is that you need for a steel mill in the United States to operate, you need customers. So here we are on the Made in America Hour. How is the steel industry going to come back if they don't have customers? And I really seriously doubt they're going to start exporting massive amounts of steel in a world steel market that's just basically loaded with dumping from many, many countries, including China. But building up that American manufacturing, building back a shipbuilding industry that we've lost, building back some of our just toasters and silverware and all of these things, these steel mills, if we're going to bring this back, it's a major national security issue, they need customers, don't they?
Absolutely. And part of that will be being wiser in how we apply the tariffs so that our downstream customers are not being hurt by tariffs on raw steel, things like that. But it's all part of rebuilding our industrial base and of course our defense industrial base.
Well, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal just the other day about a bicycle manufacturer that's trying to bring back his production from China and facing a very difficult time finding suppliers. But he's not going to give up, and it sounds like he's about 60% there. And he's assembled in the United States with foreign and imported parts. But hopefully one day he'll be able to put that proud Made in USA stamp on his bicycles.
Oh, yes, and that's why we need to be careful whenever we do these things that we address the entire supply chain. So, for example, in our legislation on generic drugs, we're making sure that we incentivize everybody who's involved in making that drug, from the active pharmaceutical ingredient to the excipients, so that we can build up the entire supply chain here and no longer be reliant on places like India and China. And then we're going to the doctor and can't get cancer drugs for our kids.
Or antibiotics. Well, we've done it again, guys. We've sort of come up to the end of the hour and run out of time. A lot more to talk about, but it'll be interesting, and we'll have to have both of you back after the inauguration, maybe a couple weeks into the administration, a couple months, to do sort of a postmortem follow-up on this and see how many of the things that we wanted to see have happened, and maybe have a better idea of a timeline for some of the things that haven't happened at that point, and where we stand on it and what needs to be done to move those across the finish line. I'd like to thank everybody for listening to us. If you are a manufacturer out there and would like to be on the program one day, please get in touch with us at Home Talk USA. Let me know, and I'll be glad to have you on to tout your products. In the meantime, you guys have a great week. We will be back again next week with another slate of guests in the program. I'm Greg Owens. This is the Made in America Hour. Have a good week.